Kia ora, g'day, welcome back. Here, just going to run through this video one question at a time, or do one video per question. This is a follow-up on the back end of the reintegration questions that I had done in some lives. I think I blasted through them last week. Well, shouldn't say blasted, it took a few hours. But anyway, I received a follow-up email from the same currently corrections officer of 7 years. I've sent through another email just saying, Kia ora anō Joe. First, thank you for going through and answering my questions in your live videos last week. I've really enjoyed listening to them. I'm back again this time to ask if you would consider doing a separate video for each topic and having it in a playlist so it's easier to find, ? So I did talk about that during the lives, and then I think I just got into a rhythm and thought, oh, I'll just do them here on the live. I shared your stuff with some of my colleagues and they enjoyed it as well, and also thought it would be helpful if the questions were their own video, were in their own video. We thought perhaps it might help with additional content for your channel as well. Understand if you're not interested, but thought I'd ask anyway. Enjoy the rest of your week and looking forward to those walk and talk interviews you're about to start. Do you think you'll interview any of the men you worked with at the reintegration service you used to manage? Modi ora, and they sign off. Cool question at the end. So anyway, that's what we're about to do here. I'm going to jump into these questions that, once I pull them up, that this corrections officer has sent through. So for background context, if it's your first time here and you're not sure of what this one is about, the lives last week could probably explain it, where I read out the whole email from the person, so I won't read it all out here. But basically, they're looking at getting into the reintegration space, but potentially maybe the youth space, trying to break that cycle before people end up going in and out of what can become a revolving door, sadly, for a number of people ending up in and out of prison. So that was the first email. Then he sent through and said he's got a few questions below, which turned out to be 11 questions. And they were all really I think they were really well thought out questions, and made me think. And so I went through, and hence why it took a few hours for me to get through those. So I'm just going to run through those in this order here. So if people want to catch me out in terms of what I've said, you can easily just, I suppose, go and have a look at the reintegration live Q&A videos that I did last week, and then just scroll through it, I guess, to go, that's not what you said in the live or whatever. So who knows what I said in the live. And we'll just jump into it now. So first question, how do you build a culture of trust, discipline, and respect in an environment where you have people from different gangs living in the same space, but without the restrictions of a prison? Cool question. A lot of this stuff, as I found and as I discovered when I went through these questions and started going through, they basically linked in. Maybe they skipped a few to link back up to the top or down to the bottom or whatever, but they were all pretty well connected. So that's the first question, trying to build a culture of trust, discipline, and respect. And different gangs is talking about living in the same space. Probably first thing I'll mention is that it wasn't just gang affiliated people that were at the service that I was lucky enough to be a part of and manage. So that was, as I think I mentioned in the live, that was a joint venture partnership between Ngāti Toa Rangatira, Te Atiawa, and Arapota Maotearoa. So two iwi and the Department of Corrections. And obviously the funding and stuff came through corrections to the iwi to be able to run and manage that service. So that was the first thing. It was just for males, so there were no females. It wasn't a, what do you call it? Co-education back in high school. It's just all men. The other part is that it wasn't just for gangs. So we had people, yes, there were a number of people that were gang affiliated and or gang members that had agreed to our kaupapa in terms of stepping away from the gang and leaving that behind and not associating with them anymore if they wanted to come to us. But it wasn't. We also had a number of people that had no gang ties as well. So they weren't affiliated. They had never been affiliated with any gangs. They may have known people or may have family members, in certain gangs. So maybe indirectly, not affiliated, but have connections too. Like heaps of people have connections. Like I have connections in there. I wouldn't say close connections, but family members and stuff in there. I know people in high positions within companies and organizations, and even in the police, who have family members who are have chosen to be a part of a gang. So where was I going? It's not just for gangs, and as an all-male service. The other part, how do you build a culture of trust, discipline, and respect in an environment like that? It all started with I guess, essentially what you might call a bit of a reset. So a bit of looking at what was already in place. I know I spoke about it at some point during the live when I was responding to these questions, but I don't know if it was to this question. The service that service had been around for maybe a couple of years before I got there, or year and a half to 2 years, maybe longer. Can't exactly remember now, but it had been established and set up for over a year, probably closer to 2 years before I stepped into the role. So there was already a fairly decent foundation, some stability, a culture that was already set, a level of discipline that you've got here. And there was, I'll be honest, I'd say that there was quite a significant amount of trust that I observed, at least anyway. I only had a meeting initially with at the time, the current service manager and the interim service manager. The interim service manager was seconded from corrections as one of the principal case managers. So his substantive role was with corrections, but he was plugging a gap while the actual service manager was on some leave. And so interim service manager was sort of managing that space. I had a meeting with them. Then I had the privilege and opportunity to go out to the whare on another day, maybe a few days later or whatever, and met some of the men. There wasn't many men there in the service at the time. It has the ability or the capacity to house and take and support 22 men at the service. And at that time, I think there might have been 5 or 6 men there. Anyway, there seemed like a really strong connection of trust there between the service manager, even between the principal case manager that was there, because he's been with corrections for about 30 years, if not 30 years, and very close to. So he knew a lot of the men already. And just to clarify as well, the men coming into the service came from the prisons all over NZ. So it's about 18 prisons, 18 or 19, somewhere around there, very close to that. I don't think it'd be too much more or much less than that. 18 to 19 prisons here in NZ, referrals or applications from men wanting to come to this particular service would come from all over the country. So not just Wellington prison or anything like that, from Rimutaka prison. Anyway, trust, discipline, and respect. There was quite a high level of trust, and I won't go into the details, but I believe the service manager, the actual service manager at that time had some lived experience which was very similar to the men that were being supported. So he served in a career for quite a long period of time, and then, by the sounds of things, and I don't know all the details, so that's why I'm not going to dare try to step into any sort of details. I think, made some decisions or choices which probably weren't ideal. He ended up serving time, from what I understand. And then from there, he sorted himself out, like his, real success story, from what I understand and from what I've seen, and from how he's gone. And I think I did mention the first time I responded to this video, or to one of these questions, that is actually from Gizzy as well, where I'm from. And we went to the same high school. And I think he may have been 1 year younger than me, or year behind where I was. So yeah, small world. So yeah, I think because of that, because of his background and the fact that he's been in the system, the men within that reintegration service at that time that he was then managing could connect with him. Like, he knew what he was talking about because he had been there, he had been inside, he knew what that life was like and the challenges and stuff that came with it. So, I'd say he had a level of respect. When you're talking about here, how do you build a culture of trust, discipline, and respect? Well, what I saw was that was already there, including, like I said, with the interim service manager, who was one of the principal case managers at the time, or senior case manager. I can't remember what the title was or is for that fella. The discipline aspect, that stuff, from what I observed, obviously they already had a process and stuff in place. So those 3 things, I think, were already there. So right off the bat, it had good bones, from what I could tell, from what I could see. There seemed to be a good level of support from corrections and from the iwi. as with anything, like this is my initial observation from what I saw. I'll get into, what we then tried to do in response to this question as I just sort of try to set the scene and give it some context. So it doesn't sound like, you know, I did this thing all by myself and from the start, because the fact is I didn't. I like to think that I had a good impact, a positive impact on improving upon, like I said, the bones that I'm trying to describe and outline that are already set. So you respect environment where people in different gangs. Cool. So I think I've covered off on the main points there. So for males only, not just for gangs, not just for those that have been part of gangs. And there was already some solid foundations to then come in and then build upon. So observe those, 2 meetings, one with service manager, interim service manager, one at the actual service with the men and the interim service manager, some of the staff, etc. Cool, seemed good. Eventually, I then, because at the time I was working for corrections at the head office, and my substantive role was like a senior health and safety advisor, portfolios. So I had 3 portfolios looking after infrastructure, or supporting infrastructure, I should say, digitally enabled business and people and culture, or AKA HR. And they'd have different projects, and my job was to support those. Most of the work was pretty heavy in that infrastructure and facilities space, though, because of the high risk nature of the work that they would be doing, and a lot of that being in the prisons themselves as well, dealing with contractors, dealing with the routines and stuff, and shift changes, and there's inmates and stuff around, etc., etc. So a lot of working parts and some fairly complicated projects for those doing the work, not necessarily for me. Some of it for me was almost like herding cats, get the people together, get the right people in the room, make sure that we're crossing the T's, dotting the I's, that we're including health and safety and design into the things that we're looking to do, supporting the project managers who don't necessarily have expertise in health and safety, but they need that support so that they can make sure that their project management is aligned with the values, the safety, and the obligations of what corrections need to be doing with these projects, and that the contractors are also fulfilling their obligations. So yeah, it was good from that context. So I brought, bringing some of that experience plus military experience plus private sector experience and a whole bunch of other areas, and then being back home, having worked with youth as well, that were, high risk youth at risk sort of stuff. It just, it seemed like a good opportunity to go to an environment whereby there these men who have had some pretty hard lives. Don't get me wrong, they've brought a lot of that stuff on themselves, but some of those things, some of the decisions and stuff that they've made, and some of, I guess, challenges and obstacles that they've faced, have had some influence from some of the challenges that they've had growing up. That's not an excuse, and through some of their associations. That's not an excuse for them. It's just the reality that is, that the people that you hang around, the things that you're exposed to, what you take time or interest in, can have a significant influence on what you choose to do. I think everybody understands that. What do they say? You're the average of your friends or something, or whatever it is. I can't remember the actual term. Other people say, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. So I think there is some truth to that. But also you can't pin all of that on those sorts of things. At the end of the day, we are each unique. We each have our own brains. We can each make our own decisions. Those obviously that are able to, that don't have a severe intellectual disability or anything like that, and that need 24/7 support. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people that are like, you and I, for want of a better term, dare I say normalish, or maybe abnormal. But we can think clearly, we can make our own decisions. We know when something doesn't feel right. We know when something doesn't look right. We know when something doesn't sound right. And if we still choose to do that thing or those things, well, that's ultimately the buck stops with the individual. So can't go blaming your mates and stuff or your leader or whatever for a poor decision that you choose to make. That's just my take. So anyway, got to come in there. I put in my application, was fortunate to get in there. And then what I identified as I started spending time in there and being in the actual role of the service manager. So without going into the detail, the actual service manager ended up resigning whilst he was still on leave. The interim service manager, well, his secondment was about to come up and he needed to go back to a substantive role. and the iwi needed to find a new service manager to come in. So there was, I don't know how many applicants there were, but I was one of them. And at the end of the day, I was lucky enough to get the green light, to get the nod. So I grabbed that with two hands and gave my notice to corrections, and then went into the reintegration space. Observed more gaps than obviously I realised. Couldn't expect. I wasn't doing an audit or anything when I first went to the whare, to the service, and met with some of the men, like I said, and the staff. That was just a meet and greet, say hello, attended a morning catch up with their morning karakia, where they'd get together, check in, go around, and then people would break off for the day. And then I hung out there for a little bit longer. So it's not like I was delving into the policies, the procedures, the processes, what they had in place, etc. I was just going off vibe and feel and how people spoke to each other there, which seemed, open, seemed trusting, and seemed respectful. And I just thought, hence why I felt, and still think to this day, that they had some decent bones there for me, and then eventually the team that we would build and bring in to build upon. In saying that, yeah, there were some gaps, identified some gaps in terms of just the standard of the homes and the upkeep of the homes inside and out. There was some issues because the homes were pretty much brand new. Some of them had been unoccupied, but they had been furnished and stuff, but there were some little, some things in there that weren't done very well. There was some damage to some of the homes whereby there had been people that had come in and out, and there was just some issues that had happened in the past, which I didn't really know about until I got in there. Some people having challenges with breaching their parole conditions and breaching the whare rules and conditions by consuming alcohol and that sort of thing. Some of the men that had been there, and this stuff I found out later, some of the men that had been there and that were there, having fights with each other. And so these things, when you're talking about the discipline, the respect, and the trust, like I was quickly starting to identify and learn that, geez, there's a bit more to this space than what I thought, but I was excited by the challenge. Like, I didn't put in my notice at corrections to come to the reintegration space thinking that it was going to be all sunshine and roses, and that it would be easy to manage and or easy to run. And as I eventually found out, I didn't think that it would be easy to get all the processes and stuff in place to establish a strong routine and safety and stability for the staff, for the community, and for the men that would come into the service. Anyway, there was heaps of stuff essentially that needed to be done. We did a big revamp of the whole assessment process for any referrals / applications that would come through to us. All the applications, it took some time, but I'd be getting calls from single point of entry, which was from corrections, which is where the referral should have been coming from. I'd get calls from family members. I'd get calls from inmates from the prisons themselves, because they knew somebody that had come to the whare, so they'd get on the phone, make a phone call, and then it'd come through to me. Get a referrals from iwi members. So there was just a bomb burst of, a scattered way of whereby all these referrals were coming through. Then there'd be online referrals through the website and stuff as well. So there's at least 5 there. And and then lawyers. So there's 6 different types of referrals. Sorry. And the 7th one, case managers. So what's that? Lawyers, case managers, family members, prisoners themselves, online referrals, iwi members, and I can't remember, maybe it was just 6, but 6 or 7, just off the top of my head in regards to referrals, and that was just chaotic. So I started reading through the documents, and I could see that in the diagram and the flow for how referrals should come, get assessed, what happens next stage, etc., even including the referrals that are not deemed suitable. There was a process for it, and they all came through. What stuck out to me was the SPO, or the single point of entry. And I was like, why am I fielding all these calls and all these different messages for referrals for loved ones, family members, cousins, nephew, whatever, when it's supposed to all come through here? So we had to clean that up first. So that was a bit of a headache. And thankfully, though, all of that stuff and those different types of referrals that were coming happened in a really short period of time. So I think I got into the seat as a service manager, and probably within the first week, I was receiving and fielding those types of referrals. And so I was straight on to, okay, this is crazy. This just doesn't make sense. There needs to be a way to streamline this. I don't know what that is, but let me have a look and see if they've got anything in place. Got one of the documents and saw that the flow chart. I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Well, that's where it's supposed to be coming from. There's, depending on who you speak to in corrections, out of corrections, there's people have their opinions about single point of entry and potential biases and that sort of thing. I don't think I experienced any of that. I think what needed to happen was, which is what happened. Corrections were great at coming to the party when I said, oh, could we get together and just talk through what this is supposed to be and how this is supposed to work. And then I had received some concerns from members within corrections and members obviously from that have been inmates versus, single point of entry doesn't know what they're doing, they're not sending the right applicants, blah, blah, blah. I thought, well, that can't be the case. So, but there was some disconnect, but it wasn't because they were intentionally doing it. It's because they didn't know, because the parties, unfortunately, what I then discovered is that they didn't get together. They weren't, they weren't meeting and therefore collaborating regularly. So we set a schedule and started meeting every week or fortnight. I think weekly initially, then fortnightly, and then we're able to move some of the other meetings and stuff to monthly and that sort of thing. But for the most part, the single point of entry meetings with probation with the whare was pretty much fortnightly or we made it fortnightly even after the initial sort of more regular, more frequent meetings. So that definitely helped. We cleared the air, got the process sorted, identified exactly who couldn't come. So when you're talking about building that culture of trust, discipline, and respect in an environment, etc., all of those things needed to happen, and we needed to be clear about who couldn't come. So we were receiving referrals for a short period of time from single point of entry, but from other people as well, in two particular categories that the whare just did not accept and we weren't set up for. So the first one was being sexual offenders were just an automatic no. Didn't matter from how long ago their sexual offending was from, didn't matter if their sexual offending was against a young person or an adult, against a male or a female. Any sexual offending on your record, you are not considered for the whare or for the service. So we got that real clear so that we would stop receiving any more of those referrals. Some people, there were a handful, thankfully only a handful, of referrals that we received that if I didn't go through and read their criminal history, they may have potentially progressed into the system, may have actually ended up there because there were some people that had committed a sexual offence, but it was like 15, 20 years ago. And so it was buried much deeper in their criminal offending history, which came through to me and I just stumbled upon it. Mistakes happen, single point of entry don't always get it right, and that's all good. I was happy to work with that. The fact is that they now knew the boundaries and they were trying. So sexual offenders was a no. The second one was high or complex needs. So individuals identified and or diagnosed as having high or complex needs, severe mental health issues, schizophrenia, potentially needing to be heavily sedated or medicated, and needing a much higher level of support. The whare that I was fortunate to be at anyway wasn't set up for that. We didn't have RNs or registered nurses on site. We're not like a one-to-one hold your hand type service. It's about enabling, empowering the individuals that come that genuinely are there for the right reasons to make change, etc. I'll delve into that later on in some of the other stuff, or maybe in this question in response to it. So those two things were clarified. Directing people, so there needed to be some communication when our auntie or uncle calls, or iwi calls, or case manager calls, or a lawyer calls. Then it was a case of me needing to speak with them, obviously update the website, and then communicate to principal case managers, communicate to iwi members, communicate to those individual phone calls where people call up, and then let them know that, hey, listen, the process for any referrals, if your nephew or your son or your husband or whatever is interested in coming to our whare, to our service, you need to speak with them and you need to ask that person to speak with their case manager to then submit a referral and a request to our service. It will go through the single point of entry. Like there's an application process, there's a form, so I would explain that to them. They would have to fill that out. Then they submit it. Their case manager will submit it on their behalf to single point of entry. It will come to me along with all the relevant information, judge's sentencing notes, their full criminal conviction history, their application form, any psychological reports or whatever, any course or program reports. I think I spoke about this in the live. Like, there's a lot of information that would land in my inbox for initial assessment to see if this person would be suitable here at the whare. So once I explained all of that, I didn't go into all of that sort of stuff with them. I just said, listen, what you need to do is go back to your loved one, your family member, say if they're interested in wanting to come here, they need to speak with their case manager. And then with their case manager, because by then we communicated through corrections, which got to the case managers, then through their case manager, they'll help them complete their paperwork, and then they'll submit their application, which will come to me. And so those family members are, oh, okay, that's all right. They're like, oh, so you can't just, it didn't stop some of them. Some of them were, most of them were good, but some of them were like, oh, can't you just use my phone call as his acceptance or his willingness to want to come to your service? So no. So that, oh, okay. Some of them followed through, some didn't, but that cleaned up and saved a whole lot of bandwidth from my perspective that was getting spread out everywhere, trying to cater to all these different referrals. And that was because, again, I didn't know. There wasn't the handover, like, because the actual service manager had resigned while he was on leave, like there wasn't an opportunity to do a handover. So the interim, which was his substantive role, as I mentioned, was a case manager in corrections, a senior principal case manager, or something like that, senior one anyway. He wasn't fully across of what the processes were that were happening at the whare. So bear in mind, he's behind the wire in the prisons, typically managing case managers, supporting prisoners, not running a reintegration service. He's been brought in to help support that. He did play a role inside the prison to help with regards to referrals and that sort of thing. But again, he hadn't been running the reintegration service for as long as what the original service manager had been doing. Band-Aid. He was a Band-Aid basically, but he did a great job in terms of looking to hold that place together until such time as the iwi were able to get somebody in, which for me, I think fortunately for me, I had an opportunity to go in there. So sorted that out. That made things a lot easier, reduced my bandwidth so that I could start focusing on the next thing for me, which was, okay, how are we assessing, like, what has been the assessment process? In a nutshell, the assessment process wasn't very good. It was like maybe one or two meetings of maybe 15 minutes, 30 minutes each one, if that, sometimes only one meeting. And if the vibe was good and if the person, it didn't go into any real depth. What I mean by that is, when you're meeting with somebody, what I discovered and learnt, what I should have mentioned is, right at the start, I should have mentioned, I'm no expert in reintegration. Okay, so apologies. I should have bloody said that at the start. I have got some experience of having worked in reintegration, but I am not an expert. I don't proclaim to be an expert, but I feel like I have some skills in that space that I've not only learnt, but that I also was able to bring into there that have, added some value. I like to think anyway. Well, that's what I've been told anyway. So, anyway, where was I? Yeah, looking and assessing the assessment process for people to come in. That just didn't seem to go deep enough for me. It didn't seem to be rigorous enough. So we changed that. I thought, yeah, no, that's not enough time, because if you go to somebody who's in the prison, they've got a parole board hearing coming up, and part of their parole board hinges on them having a place to go and stay. Of course, I think they're going to tell you what it is that they think you want to hear. Will you abide by the rules of the house? Yes. Will you not associate with your gang member friends if they were, gang members? Yes. No, I won't. I'm done with that. Will you make sure that you don't consume drugs or alcohol on site, that you don't bring it onto site, that you'll obey the curfew, etc., etc.? List goes on. Yes. No, I've changed. There's no way I'm doing that anymore. Oh, I'm over that, eh? Like, no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm prepared to do what it is. Like, they're going to say what it is that they think that you want to hear to give themselves the best chance. I've heard the term and learnt this as well in my time with corrections before I got to the reintegration space, actually, is that, inmates, particularly those that have been in for a long time or in and out, they are master manipulators. They are very, very good at what they do. They have a lot of time to think and observe and work out ways to try to stack things in their favor, and where they can. Hence why there's an induction process for corrections officers and that around, getting got so that they don't get got, so that they can have their antennas on and their alerts up as and when potential situations, not only for safety, physical safety, but as and when things, uh, boundaries may start to be getting blurred and lines may potentially be crossed. So they are master manipulators. They may not like that term. I've met some of them that do like that term. I don't think I've actually met any of the inmates that didn't like that term. Some of them took it as a badge of honor. That's oh yeah, that's cool. That's what they think about us. Um, and when I say they, that's what they think about us. It's just you know, it's a comment that has been shared around and continues to be shared around to this day. So I was conscious of it before I got into the reintegration space, and so I would say that I did have a healthy amount of skepticism with regards to any application that came in, and that was just consistent across the board for me. So um, those who come in, do all of that research and reading as soon as I can, and then go back to then make contact with the case manager. So single point of entry, get all of that. It'd come with me with all the relevant details and the person's information of the referral. And then all I needed to do then was just have one single point of contact, which was the case manager. So if a lawyer had questions, if the inmate had questions, if a family member had questions, I'd be like, listen, I'm not going to be talking to the case manager, to auntie, to uncle, to cousin, to spouse, to lawyer, to the male in prison, and doing that for all the referrals that come through. I'm going to speak obviously, with the applicant when I get a chance, when that time comes, if they progress that far. But aside from the applicant themselves, the inmate, the only other person is the case manager. So if any of those family members, lawyers, friends, etc., if spouses, if they had questions about how the application for their loved one was going, then I'd just refer them back to their case manager. Please speak with the case manager or speak with your loved one. I won't be talking about that or getting into those details with you. Like, we've got a process in place, and so that I'm not talking to everybody in the whole of Aotearoa about how a particular applicant is going because they heard so-and-so from this person and that person, we streamline that process and just keep it as neat and as tidy as we can. So some people got a bit frustrated and annoyed with that. It is what it is. We needed to be able to, or I felt I needed to be able to manage my time, concentrate my energy and focus in regards to what I need to be doing, which was assessing suitable people to come to the whare, or continue to be assessed to come to the whare, and fill the service up, fill all 22 beds within the homes that we had. Never got to that stage, unfortunately. Got to about 12 or 13 at one stage, but things happen and people play up, and sadly some people got recalled. Sadly some people got exited. I exited a few people just for not doing what they said they would do. So the trust aspect of that, identifying that process and that it needed work, we looked to strengthen that, which we did. Once we strengthened that, then again, with regards to trust, we needed to be transparent with the applicants. So when I'd have the meeting with them, if they progressed that far to having the first initial meeting with me, we lay all the cards out on the table, give them an opportunity to assess us just as we were assessing them for suitability to come to us. So it's a two-way assessment, not just all one-way traffic. If they then got through that, and if they agreed with that, and if they liked what they heard, I would delve into a lot more stuff with them in that first meeting. That first meeting could take an hour, could take 3 hours. Just depended on how big or how thick their criminal conviction history was. Some people like 20 plus pages, some people 1 page, so, and then everything in between. So there's, a fair bit to get through to try to work out whether this person is tika and pono, or being honest and true in regards to them wanting to come to us. So I don't think you can get to that sort of level in a 15-minute conversation with somebody. There may be some people that are expert at doing that. Maybe they can. I couldn't. I felt for me, I needed to have time with them, minimum an hour. I'd ask them to allocate, and that usually happened. But more often than not, a lot of those meetings went well over an hour because there's lots to discuss. When there's patterns in individuals' offending behaviour, when they've been released on probation multiple times and they've just reoffended and done exactly the same thing and then gone back in again, it raises the antenna and questions like, so what's changed now? What if you get released for the 5th time And all these other times you've said the same thing as from what I can read, but you've done exactly the same thing, and then you've ended up being arrested and gone back inside. Why has it changed now? So and some of the people didn't have an answer for that, so it just didn't instill confidence that they were being legitimate. So yeah, going through that, transparent about what the whare was about, what we expect, what would happen, the consequences. That's always important, because we never wanted anybody to come into the whare and then be like, oh, you never told us, you never told me, I should say, that would happen, that I'd get exited if I, got back late after curfew. You never told me I'd get exited if I, drank alcohol. It's like, well, yes, we did. Yes, we did, because I told you in the first session, you were told if you progress to the second phase, which was to 6 interviews with your navigator, and then you were reminded again because we quizzed you in the last session, which is essentially the 7th or 8th session by that time, whereby you had to respond and answer all the questions, whereby we run through all the rules again. And so therefore you did know. We never had that because we anticipated that well in advance, and we had multiple layers to make sure that all of that sort of stuff and our transparency came through. And that helped us earn the trust of the applicants that would then go on to come to the whare if they progressed through everything. The discipline aspect, that was all part of that process, and being transparent and them knowing what the consequences were, but also knowing what our expectations were as well. And to, with regards to that, the discipline on their side in terms of doing the things that they're saying that they want to do. So there's lots that they needed to provide for us: short-term, medium-term, long-term goals, safety plans, be present for the meetings, take notes if they needed to, be able to give us answers to the questions that we would be asking, particularly in the last session. Be open and honest about their offending. We'd delve right into that in a lot of detail. Learn about them, where they're from, where their bones are, their whakapapa and that sort of thing, or their family history, as much as they know or are able to share. And yeah, just like get right down into the weeds of trying to get to know this person as well as we can before they ever get to us, if they got to us. And then the respect, I think the respect just naturally formed over time through the fact that our process was robust, through the fact that we were transparent and honest about what our expectations were, and that they could be, and that they could and should be able to hold us to account as well. So it was a literal two-way, because they're not in a prison anymore. They're not confined to being locked behind or in a cell at night. They're not being watched every movement. They're not restricted to a certain amount of hours outside or yard time or whatever. They did have a curfew, and they did have other probationary restrictions, some which might have meant them wearing a Rolex, not an actual Rolex, but you know what I mean, electronic monitoring around their ankle. We just referred to it as a Rolex. And yeah, and then they're reporting to their probation officer, abiding by the service rules, what we expect, which they already agreed to before they got to us. What else is there? So that was that: trust, discipline, and respect in the environment. So the environment was very much, which I haven't really spoken about. I don't know if I did in the lives either, but we try to create very much more of a family environment, whānau environment for anybody coming in there. And what we mean by that is just, when people come, greet them, welcome them at the whare, invite them in for a cup of tea, whatever, a biscuit, whanaungatanga, sitting down, those values and that sort of thing, which are great values, but they don't always play out or they don't always get applied the way that you might expect at times, depending on where you go. So we made a conscious effort of making sure that happened. Our communication with each other was open and honest and respectful. So that helped create that environment. We didn't put all of one particular gang member group into one house and another lot of gang members in another house. Everybody needed to be able to integrate. So at one stage in one of the homes, we had a former skinhead, former black power, and former mongrel mob member living in the one home. Another home, we had a former King Cobra, Nomad, and non-affiliated in another house. Another home, we had non-affiliated Black Power mongrel mob. Yeah, so we didn't put those from the same sort of gangs or from the same gangs in the same houses. People were expected to, and again, there was one of those transparent things as part of the process, us disclosing to those that were being assessed that this is what the story is at our whare. Any potential conflicts of interest, do you know this person? All those sorts of conversations were had on both sides with men behind the wire and also men that were already in the service. And by and large, pretty much people either knew who somebody was whose application was in and they were very happy for them and they were hopeful that they would be able to make it because they all have interactions with each other, I guess, at different stages. And if there ever was a person that may have been a challenge for somebody else that was currently in the service, or vice versa, then it's just a call as to whether or not we progress with that application or not. Because if the tensions are too high, depending on their differences and or potentially what's happened outside before their applications landed on our desk, and before we knew anything about who these people were, well, then ultimately for us, the safety and well-being of our staff, of our community, of the other men is more important than disrupting that by putting men in a vulnerable situation whereby they're being forced to try to be polite to each other. Because again, we've got male and female staff. We've got young children in the community. It's just not worth weighing up the risks in terms of what happens if something does kick off here between these two. And given the fact that we now know that there is some friction between these guys and it doesn't seem like it's gone away, well, then we have to make a call. Like if there's one person already in the whare, in the service, well, we're not going to boot them out to bring this person in. So, sometimes I'd have to make a call in and around that, but be able to rationalize that and give good reasons as to why that is, and that would always be done in consultation with staff, with the men, with corrections, with the iwi, get guidance from my boss, and and then present that once I was happy and that I'd weighed everything up and I felt comfortable with what the decision was, and I'd let people know this is what I think the decision is. This is what I think the direction that will go based on this and what we have, and like to get your feedback and support. But this is what I think it is, and this is why. These are the reasons why. Happy to be corrected, happy to be questioned or grilled and challenged on. And so let's get into it. So thankfully, I had like I shared in the lives, had really strong support from Thomas Perenara, TJ Perenara's dad, the former All Black. Well, former All Black, unless he makes the team again this year. Who knows, under Dave Rennie. But it was awesome having Thomas as my general manager, as my direct manager at that time. He enabled me and trusted me with a heck of a lot in regards to me serving in my role at the time, but was always there to provide backup and support and top cover. If anything, if he needed to defend anything or protect me, I felt like he did that. I can recall at least one time where he did that, and I didn't know anything about it until later on. So grateful for him. And I think maybe what you got here, people from different gangs living in the same house, but without the restrictions of a prison. Yeah, long answer, I know, but that's it's a great question. Like there's lots to it. I could carry on speaking for quite a long time just about that one question, but I'm pretty sure, what's that? How long's that been? 44 minutes so far in regards to just that one question. There is a lot in regards to the reintegration space, as you would know. I assume you know and would have an idea, being a corrections officer for 7 years. And if not, hopefully me sitting here talking a bit about this in response to your first question of the 11, which I have, again, if anybody's here, I have answered all of these questions pretty much maybe in 2 or 3 live sessions. But as per the follow-up request that has come through from this person, I guess it's a good idea as well. I think I did talk in that live that I would do these as their own content, and then I just didn't. I just I just melded them all together into a couple of lives or 2 or 3 live sessions. But yes, there is a heck of a lot that I could talk about in regards to how you build the service, not just the trust, discipline, and respect in the environment, which effectively is the service. But I like the way that you've called out specific things in there. You have made mention of people from different gangs. So again, just to reiterate, it's not all gangs, which you already know because you've listened to the videos, but in case anybody else is interested in this space and decides to have a listen, it's not just, well, our service wasn't just for gang members, and there's some pretty robust processes in and around it. But without the restrictions of a prison, yep, there's still some controls and stuff in there. There's still some requirements that they need to comply with from probation/corrections and from us at the time of where I was as the whare, as the service. So as long as people were above board in doing those things on both sides, like the men in the service or wanting to come into the service and us as a staff, including me as a service manager at that time, if we were all being tika and pono, being honest and true in our dealings, then, it ran really well. Like during my time there, I don't recall any fights. Like over a year there, I had the privilege of serving and working there. I don't recall any fights happening on site between any of the men or staff and men or the men and members of the community, which is good. Actually, there was a fight, not between, but one of our residents who was a former Mongrel Mob member, had the tattoos on his face. The area where we were in was a known Black Power area. So he was just at the shops, and there was some, I've still got the video footage of it. There was some Black Power members in that area. They saw him, they started talking. He was trying to de-escalate and walking away, saying, no, I'm not part of that. I'm not part of that group anymore. But it doesn't help when you've got the tattoos on your face, and they're not buying that. So, and this is their territory, this is their area. So they chased him into a chemist area. It was about 3 or 4 at one stage onto one fella. He defended himself as well as he could, did a good job of defending himself, got banged up a bit, but and he was angry, obviously, as you would be. But what I loved was that he gave me a call. He called me. I was at the whare, shot straight to the local supermarket where he was, or the area where he was. The other men had already gone, and not to, I would have been there to try to de-escalate, but 100% I would have been there to try to defend him and myself as well. I would have been trying to explain the situation if they didn't want to have anything of it and they were going to start trying to attack, or then I'm not just going to be a punching bag for them. and the bro that was there, that unfortunately, 3, and at one stage, like I said, 4 on 1, with guys just bum rushing him at that time. Extremely, extremely difficult for anybody to try to deal with. I don't care who you are. 3, and like I said, up to 4 in the video footage, which I still have on my phone actually, is, those odds for anyone, and they're all rushing in from different angles. Good luck. So he did a great job covering up, trying to protect himself. He didn't try to fight back, and I think by him not trying to fight back, realistically, as I've looked at the footage and reflected on it, that's probably another part of what really protected him more. He literally had to curl up and try to protect, the parts of his body as best he could while taking a hammering, being stomped, being kicked, being punched, fellas trying to knee him and doing all sorts of stuff. So he's very lucky that they didn't appear to be using any weapons or knives or bats or anything like that. But they were giving it to him, or as much as they could. So I think had he been trying to fight back, he would have exposed a lot more of himself, which could have resulted in much, much worse outcomes, consequences. So that is the one that happened, but not in the service, not amongst any of our men. It was sadly one of those things whereby, he. I believe he thought he wasn't. He's a very confident fella in the first place. Won't mention his name, but I think he thought, oh, they'll be all right. Like if he says that he's not with them, that they'll just be okay. But nah. Like they just arced up when they saw him. You see the Mongrel Mob tattoos on the face, and this is a Black Power area. Well, it's going to go down like a lead balloon. So yeah, we learned from that and put some systems and stuff in place and safety measures to try to protect our men even more and make things a bit better. One of those things, because he was in that area to go see MSD, Ministry of Social Development, getting certain support and stuff like that, which they would help out with. but that would mean going into the little shopping centre area to the township and get that. And that's where a lot of Black Power members and stuff will hang out. They're in an MSD in that as well, but typically nothing generally happens there. There is a little bit of security there. Excuse me, but this happened while he was away from that, just walking past the shops and getting ready to walk back to basically the services, walking distance. But that's what happened. So after that, we learned from that. We spoke with MSD. We had our manager there, and she would come to the whare then to look after the men. So, we looked at ways to try to eliminate that, something that we knew about, but we didn't, to be honest, we didn't really expect anything to happen, but it did. And so we learned from that, minimize the footprint if and when we did need to go into that area, made sure that there were staff going forward if we were taking men into that area, and tried to be mindful of the times when we would go. So sometimes that meant doing a little bit of a drive around and have a look first, make sure that the coasts were clear. If our men needed to go into that area to get anything, otherwise, it's a case of them needing to go to another area if they had to. So lots of stuff that were put in place to try to look after our men. But yeah, man, geez, lots of stuff there that just come flooding into the memory now as I think about that, and that's just one of those things. So anyway, appreciate your time once again. That is your first question done in regards to reintegration, and I'll look to try to answer some more of these as I go and do them in separate reintegration specific topics or questions based on what you've sent through. So hopefully that helps answer that question. If it doesn't, oh well, too bad. If you stuck around this long and listened to me jabber on about and essentially repeat myself, although it may be very different in terms of the words and what I'm talking about as I go through these 11 questions now. Like I said, if you want to go back and have a look at the live videos that I did just last week, pretty sure it was last week, there's at least 2 or 3 videos in and around where I look to answer these 11 questions on reintegration. You'll hear my answers and stuff in there. But I like to think, my responses are going to be fairly consistent throughout. Otherwise, what I've been talking about is just a whole bunch of bull caca. So anyway, take care, look after yourselves, and I'll see you on the next video, eh?